We're going to be in Psalm 47. If you want to find your way there, I'm going to not just read through it, I'm going to preach my way through it. I kind of like doing that. And we're going to hit on some other stuff. Psalm 47, scholars say, has a whole backstory that's significant. Actually, 46 and 47, they say, have a backstory that's very important. But all of that to start with, God has this marvelous way of walking with Him, of taking us through these certain experiences for us to personally understand something that we know to be true. You see, God uses these moments to reveal Himself and to make Himself more real to us. I want you to get this. The Bible is a record of events telling us about real people who had real experiences with a real God. One of these moments is recorded in Isaiah chapter 36 and 37. I'm not going to read that to you today for time's sake. I'm going to narrate it for you. It actually occurred around 700 BC. So while Hezekiah was the king of Judah, Hezekiah, if you remember going through Kings and Chronicles, there's a good king and a bad king and a good king and a bad king and like some really crazy kings. Well, Hezekiah was this really good king. And recorded of his kingship is in 2 Kings chapters 16 through 20, 2 Chronicles chapters 28 through 32, and Isaiah chapters 36 through 39. See, Isaiah and Micah served as prophets for King Hezekiah. And King Hezekiah had a dad. His dad was Ahaz, and he had a son named Manasseh. Funny story, we joked about naming one of our kids Manasseh, but it was just a joke. But Ahaz and Manasseh, so for those of you who grew up generationally with bad families. I had someone tell me recently that they basically, their significant other came from bad seed and they were always going to be bad. And I said, well, that's not true because that person has saving faith. And since they have saving faith, they have God who dwells within them. And so it doesn't matter what the seed of the dad or mom looked like. God can change that person's heart. And Hezekiah is proof of that because Ahaz was a terrible king. And then Manasseh, who came after Hezekiah, was a terrible king. So Hezekiah was in the middle of two bad kings. But this is what was said of King Hezekiah in 2 Chronicles 31. He did what was good and right and faithful before the Lord his God. In everything that he undertook in the service of the king's temple, and in obedience to the law and the commands, he sought his God and worked wholeheartedly, and so he prospered. It's what I tell you guys every Sunday. Hezekiah fixed his steps to follow the Lord. And he walked it out day after day after day. He didn't have this easy king jet set lifestyle that, we maybe think of today where everything was handed to him. I'm going to share this story with you that builds into how Psalm 46 and 47 came to be. You see, there was this kingdom called the Assyrian Empire. They were the most brutal kingdom in the time period. Hezekiah had already watched them invade the northern kingdom of Israel. Now he finds this king and his kingdom at his front door, the Bible says, with more than 185,000 soldiers. The Assyrians were known for being exceptionally brutal in their warfare, but they were also known at being very smart and brutal in how they developed mental warfare. You see, they sent a messenger to taunt the people of Jerusalem, to tell them it was useless. Their king couldn't save them, nor could their God save them. The Assyrians mocked the people, they mocked the people's God, and they mocked King Hezekiah. You see, the messenger assured the people of Judah that no king or any God could ever save them from the mighty, powerful kingdom of Assyria. They even sent a letter directly to Hezekiah telling him, just give up and surrender now, bud. We are going to annihilate you. Hezekiah gets this letter, and there's a lot more story here that I can't really get into it all, but you should go read it because it's action-packed, man. But upon receiving this letter, Hezekiah did the only thing he knew to do. He took the letter, he went to the temple, he laid the letter before God, and he prayed. You see, you got this pattern, right? The last couple weeks on Wednesday nights, what did Jesus do when he had to make a big decision? He got away, went to a mountain, and prayed all night long. We just learned on last Wednesday night, what did Jesus do when he heard John the Baptist had been beheaded? That was his cousin. It says he got on a boat and went to a desolate place. So desolate, the Bible says, that that's where the feeding of the 5,000 took place. There was nothing out there. It was this completely abandoned place that he went to be by himself and pray. We just read last week, actually the last 2 Sundays, of King David and the sin mess of his entire life. And I can tell you that nobody in here has more sin in their life than King David did. And what did David do? David humbly positioned himself in front of God and he asked for forgiveness. But he meant it. It wasn't just this little Hail Mary prayer he prayed and didn't really mean it. It was this contrite, sincere, broken heart going before the Lord, entrenched in so much sin. Psalm says that it was more than the numbers of the hairs on his head, and he couldn't see through it. It was so thick. The problems were so many, he couldn't see through them. And what did he do? He cried out to God in prayer. And what I love about David is David was what? A man after God's own heart, right? He was this man of God, yet he had these sin struggles, just like me and just like you. And he prayed. And then we come today, we have this secret weapon that nobody is utilizing. I heard a friend of mine earlier told me, because when you pray, it feels like you're not doing nothing, right? It's what it feels like. If I'm honest, it does, right? It feels like you're not doing something and I should somehow put myself out there and do something about the situation. Whereas I think what God is saying is your greatest weapon and your greatest tool is to come before me in silence, in solitude, and pray and cry out to me. And like he told David, I will hear your prayers, I will establish your steps, and I will give you joy and a new song to sing. And my friends, I can tell you today, that's not what many of us do. That's not my immediate default in my own life. That the first reaction when somebody does something to you is to do what? Is to react back, right? To say something back, to be mean back, instead of taking what the person had to say and taking it to the Lord and perhaps asking God if there's any truth in what they said about you to start with, right? And maybe there is. Maybe the Lord will reveal to you, I was using them to tell you the truth, and you're mad about it now, right? And I share that with you to say that he got this letter of this great king who was taunting him, taunting his people, taunting his God, had military victory after military victory. He has more than 185,000 troops standing at his front door. He says, I'm going to annihilate you. Would you just surrender now? He takes the letter, places it before God, and prays. This is what was said of King Hezekiah in 2 Kings 18. For he held fast to the Lord. He did not depart from following him, but kept the commandments that the Lord commanded Moses. And the Lord was with him. Wherever he went out, he prospered. And remember, he came from a bad dad. He was a bad king. He wasn't a good guy. So he didn't have this crutch he leaned on and said, well, my dad was a psycho, so I'm going to be a psycho. No, he was trying to align himself and follow Yahweh, be faithful to God and the commandments that was given to Moses, and he was trying to do what God wanted him to do with his life. And I can tell you that that's where most of us find ourselves today. Difficulty, challenges, hardship, addictions, pressures all around, right? And what do? We try to take it in our own hands, do it our own way. And it almost never works. You see, Hezekiah asked the Lord to save them for the sake of his own name, for God's name, so that all people might know that their God is the God over all things. This is 2 Kings 19:19. So he didn't go to God and cry and whine. He went to God and said, you are the one true God. We're facing imminent defeat. There's only one thing that can be done here, and that's you show up, God. And I know there are people in this room right now that got situations that unless God shows up in their situation, and it would be deemed a miracle And I'm not talking some weird stretch your leg or heal your back on video, YouTube stuff. I'm talking about people who have hardened heart sinners who turn to God, and you go, there's no other way that could happen because that guy talked to him, that guy talked to him, that guy talked to him. Tom stalked him for 6 months and tried 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 and tried, and then all of a sudden they turn on their own, right? Because God did it. Because salvation is the Lord, right? It's not mine. And I tell you that to say that I know you're here and you have pressure and you have imminent defeat. It looks like there's 185,000 soldiers at your front door in your marriage, in your finances, in your addiction issue, in your marriage problems. And what did all these guys do? They did the same thing. They took it to God and said, Lord, it has to be you. And so then they had this trust and obedience, because we learned from prayer 2 Wednesday nights ago, if you weren't there, that you pray not to tell God what you need, because Jesus said He already knows what you need. You pray because you're saying to God in a humble position, I trust you, I obey you, I'm letting my needs be known to you, God, but I'm also going to, this is the kind of prayers that I like, God. Lord, I want your will to be done. And maybe your will is for me to live another 30 years, God. Maybe it's not. And if it's not, Lord, would you let me to understand that? So, to see how me dying shortly would benefit your kingdom, because it's all about God's kingdom, not about my pleasures here on earth, right? But God, I want to do your will, and I want to be faithful to that to the very end, even if it's not what I want. And I think that's not the prayer that folks are praying. They're not praying God's will, they're praying their own will. And Hezekiah said, God, we want you to move. We want you to be glorified. We want this to be about you. And the very night that Hezekiah prayed, an angel of the Lord went into the Assyrian camp. This is a true story, right? Real people, real problems, real experiences, real God. And 185,000 Assyrian troops were killed. The Assyrian king, Isaiah 37, 36 through 38 tells us, went home, was worshiping his false god. His son goes in and kills him while he's worshiping his false god. This coming from this prideful, arrogant man who said, I'm better than your king. I am greater than, my God are greater than your gods. My people are greater than your people. In all this, Hezekiah and the nation saw God reveal himself. So imagine we're in this church and there's 185,000 troops outside. And we pray and we go to bed and they say, hey, we're going to attack you the next morning. And we get up early, ready to go, I don't know what we're going to do, but we're going to try to do something right. I can't go down without doing something right. And we open the door and everybody's laying dead everywhere. And then we go, what did we do? And we talk to each other, and did anybody do anything? Did you try to poison everybody? Did you do something? And everybody go, no, we prayed to God and He answered our prayers. Right? And that's what I think we find ourselves today in our own lives with our own 185,000 troops standing at our door. They not only knew it, they knew how powerful their God was. He was the most powerful God, the most powerful king over all the earth. And they already believed it, but as you guys know from reading the Old Testament, they would come on and go off, come on and go off, come on and go off. They'd see these awesome things and fall away, awesome things fall away. So they knew it, but then they got to experience it firsthand. And what everybody says is they want what? They want eyewitness evidence, right? They want to be able to see it for themselves. And in this account, God allowed these people to see Him do this to establish His power and rule, which was greater than any other king, any other God that anybody would ever bring to the table. He was the creator and ruler of all of mankind. See, scholars believe in response to this experience that we just read about, the sons of Korah wrote Psalms 46 and 47. The sons of Korah wrote about 7 of the Psalms. There's 150 Psalms. David wrote half the Psalms, so that's like 75 of the Psalms. Moses wrote some. There's a couple other guys who wrote some. But the sons of Korah and Asaph were the 2 most prominent groups of temple singers. And the sons of Korah had this dad. And Korah was the dad in Numbers who went up against Moses and Aaron. And he basically was the end of him. he tried to overthrow Moses and Aaron. But all this to say, God used the sons of Korah to then become these, part of the group, to become these temple singers who they say wrote these psalms. And a psalm means song or songs of praise. And so when you read Psalm 47, you got to think of it in light of, like, we could sing this and worship to it, right? This is something we should be singing and praising to God. And here's how the beginning of Psalm 47 goes. God is over all the earth, to the choir master, Psalm of the sons of Korah, Psalm 47, clap your hands, all people, shout to the God with loud songs of joy, for the Lord Most High is to be feared, a great king over all the earth. He subdued peoples under us and nations under our feet. He chose our heritage for us, the pride of Jacob, whom he loves, Selah. That's the first 4 verses. And so imagine these guys singing this upon seeing 185,000 troops dead in one night. Would that be some kind of joy that maybe you've not expressed in church before? That's like, you're experiencing this saving faith, right? But it's like this faith journey that you go on with God, and parts of faith are not seen. But I was reading this thing the other day that said, but there's so many aspects to this unseen faith that are real, i.e. Jesus, the man, God-man, came to earth. We have a whole testimony and account of his life. And so you say, this faith is blind, I'm just kind of walking around. No, you're not. One is an account of the life of Jesus and all these incredible things that he did. But you have other things. You have the Holy Spirit that comes to dwell in you as your guarantee upon your proclamation of faith. So you have the Spirit of God, if you've made a proclamation of saving faith, comes to dwell in you. So the Assyrians, they taunted God. Then in one night, God made it very clear. In fact, God made it so clear that there is no king that will ever stand against me. He annihilated them. He wiped them out. You see, this psalm is not gloating or celebrating the death of these people, but calling the Assyrians and the people to respond to the God of Israel and Judah to be saved. So this is all about saving faith. The whole journey as your Christian walk is about you being a light in a dark world to lost people. This is all about helping people who are far from God find God. You see this call to fear here where he says, is to be feared. The Lord, the Most High, is to be feared. This is not a call of this like thing where you should be shivering back in the corner afraid. It's saying, no, you're submitting to the authority of God in this reverential fear. This is a call of salvation, saying that I know that I'm a lost person separated. And I know that I can find saving faith in this God. And I want to submit my life in my authority over to Him and live for Him. And that's what's being talked about here. This is basically to say, you Assyrians, you need to turn to our God. He can save you. You should have fear from what you just seen Him do. And I'm sure if there was any eyewitness news account today that would say 185,000 troops were just wiped out, everybody'd pay attention, wouldn't they? And you'd want to know, how the heck did that just happen? What's going on? Or did they get some kind of a virus? Did they somehow die? How do you kill 185,000 people in one night? And to emphasize the size of 185,000, I read this little note that said that's about the size of the Marine Corps. So it'd be like our whole United States Marine Corps just being annihilated in one night. People would be shivering in their boots in the United States of America if the entire Marine Corps disappeared overnight, right? We got the Army and the Navy and the Air Force. We need the boys to go in first, right? And they're gone. And so we would be afraid to death. I want you to get this. God has made Himself known here. He cannot be ignored. You don't ignore 185,000 troops being killed. He cannot be defeated. He just showed that. All the king did, Hezekiah, was go in and submit the letter to the Lord and pray about it, and God took care of the rest of the work. It's what Jesus told us. When we yoke with Him, the yoke becomes easier. He doesn't say we're not going to have any burdens in life. He says the yoke will be easy. It'll be light. And so when you're yoked with Christ and when you're living your life for God, The burdens that you will carry will not be your own. Jesus does the heavy lifting. You see, God is also saying here that He alone is the one who saves. Nobody can take credit for the 185,000 deaths besides God. And He alone is our refuge. Here's some application for you. Psalm 47 celebrates the rule of the King of the universe. As New Testament believers, we know that the King now is who? This is Old Testament. We're in New Testament. It's Jesus. And so Psalm 47 is celebrating the sovereign rule of King Jesus, who is over all the earth. In the Great Commission, Jesus establishes all authority in heaven and on earth and had been given to Him. He says, go therefore and make disciples, teaching them. And so again, everything is about coming under the headship of God and then going out and doing what He said to do. Jesus just told you, you are to go therefore and make disciples of all nations and teach them. You see, God saved His people from the Assyrians in order that His name might be made known, and He has saved us for this same purpose. Just like when David in Psalm 40 cried out to God. He was in dire straits. He was in some bad situation. We don't know what happened in Psalm 40. In Psalm 51, we know what happened. He had slept with that woman and got her pregnant and had her husband killed, and he had himself a big mess. And he didn't know what to do about that. He cried out to God, and God came to his aid. And I tell you that to say that David had all these problems. And he went to God, and God heard his cries, and God established his steps. It doesn't tell us how long all that took, though, right? And so I know that there are people here today who are going, I've been going to God. 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 I don't feel like He's establishing my steps, Tom. I found that God usually hardly ever moves in our time. It's in His time. Because His time is doing a greater work in our heart, usually causing us to die to ourselves, usually causing us to face something about our own self, our own sin, our own life, that we have to maybe surrender to, die to, submit, turn over to Him. And then I found oftentimes like God moves in those moments. But He gave David this new song so that many will see, fear, and put their trust in the Lord. He saved the people of Judah through King Hezekiah's prayer so that all the nations would see and declare His goodness, His greatness, and there's no match to Him. I did want to highlight this word Selah because that's my daughter's name, and you guys are probably like, well, it said Selah. It says Selah throughout the Psalms, and I want to give you a definition. If you had a Strong's Exhaustive Concordance and you went to that, it would tell you that it is the suspension of music or to pause. And my wife would say Selah causes us to pause. Her beauty causes us to pause. Her sweetness will take you back. Shiloh's not like Selah. Selah is just kind, she's sweet, she's the nicest one in our house for most of the time. She comes up and gives you this hug. But it probably came about, this use of this word, in connection with the Psalms, which were used as this musical accompaniment in public worship. So think of it this way. That Selah is there to introduce a pause in the worship to present a benediction. Like this one, in number 6. So picture the song being sung, and then like we do in worship, there's music's still playing, but right there's this lull in the music, and then somebody does what? They say something. That's that pause. And like this one right here. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make His face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up His countenance upon you and give you peace. And so that word Selah there, I just wanted to throw that in because I knew somebody would go, what does that mean? Because that's your daughter's name and it has some strange meaning that I need to know what it is now. And it's meant to be a pause to introduce a benediction or prayer towards the end of a service that was mixed with music and song. But we have verses 5, 6, and 7. God has gone up with a shout. The Lord with the sound of a trumpet. Sing praises to God. Sing praises. Sing praises to our King. Sing praises. For God is the King of all the earth. Sing praises with a psalm. It's important to understand the meaning of the Scriptures. But it's also very important to understand the sense of the Scriptures. And the sense and the emotion in Psalm 47, if you go to seminary, they're going to tell you, read the text so many times that you get inside the author's mind and you understand the rate, pitch, and tone. Like, how are they talking? Why are they talking? What are they saying? How would they be saying it if they were here? And I'm here to tell you that these people in Psalm 47 have this exuberant and joyful celebration. They've just been saved from being killed by 185,000 troops. Wouldn't you say, sing praises to God, sing praises to our King, sing praises, God, you are the greatest God in all the earth. I praise you, like, oh my gosh. If there was 185,000 bodies laying outside, that's how we would praise God, right? Yeah, we come into church, no. Christian, the job of the preacher is to challenge you. And I'm here to tell you that this is an expression of surrender. What happens if the cops come? What do they say to do? Put your hands up. I surrender. I got nothing. I'm broke. I'm helpless. That's what you're doing, right? That's the same thing that this expression of worship is, and it's a simple expression and communication to God without saying anything, that you are that I am yours, God, that I am nothing, that I am in need of you, that I am broken, and you are incredible. You saved me. You turned my broken, dried up, dead heart, and you brought life to it. You've given me joy and something to sing about and praise about and talk to people about, and that's the kind of worship that Christians are supposed to do. Right? And that's not happening in like 98% of churches. I'm not talking about weird stuff. We're not going to do anything weird here. But if people in their area want to worship and celebrate God, or come to this altar and worship and celebrate God without drawing weird attention to yourself, because don't forget, I went to an AOG church for 5 years. I was in leadership. I get the whole thing. And we're not going to do the weird stuff here, but we are going to celebrate and worship God, because that's what these people are talking about here. And that's what I think we're missing in this church and in a lot of other churches. When we do worship from this view, looking down, it looks dead. You look dead. The people had just seen supernatural salvation that the Lord had done on their behalf. And in response, they were clapping, they were shouting, they were singing, they were rooting for their favorite team, right? I see guys do it all the time at Buffalo Wild Wings, or you name the place, or you get excited about your sports team, right? Or the high school football team, you know, when your guy gets a quarterback sack pass, or when he kicks the ball and nobody knew he was going to be the kicker, and he just kicked it all the way down the field, and you go, all right, man, I'm celebrating you, man. That was awesome, right? Or you watch him get that quarterback, he goes, you see me get that sack? I said, I saw it. I saw it. You celebrate with them, right? Yeah, when we come to church, whether the lights are turned down or not, we put the lights down to help you, to create a little more intimate environment, to say, it's okay. Like, you don't have to be where I'm at. That's where I'm going to accept you for where you're at, right? You don't have to be where I'm at. But what I'm telling you is you should celebrate your salvation. You should celebrate this God who saved you from insurmountable odds and certain death. This story is your story. It's my story. This sounds personal to these people because it was. They had just witnessed this happen. So while on the verge of utter destruction and in a situation where there seemed to be no hope, God saved them. And the people in Psalm 47 are showing you the proper response to joyful worship, which should go on every Sunday without a preacher getting up here and lighting you up. It should be your normal response to, I'm thankful. I'm like David. He has sinned. He cries out to God. God saves him. And then like 11 verses later, he's like, it's worse than it was 11 verses ago. It's more than the hairs on my head. I can't see through it. And you're like, we just cried out to God with one problem. And then God saved him. And here it is, worse. We don't exactly know what it was, but I'm here to tell you that David's life is your life. It's my life. We're going to have challenge and struggles and difficulties, but it's this constant, humble position of crying out to God, of submitting to God, of being around other believers who are going to encourage you, pray for you, spur you on, not look down upon you and judge you, but want to lift you up to see you walk in this like new life, right? Because you're supposed to be a new person. The world needs to see, here's the application, the world needs to see that it is good to know King Jesus. Coming to Logos Church, I'm still in a line from another guy. The leader of the Sin Network said, the Sin Network, which is the missions wing of the SBC, the Sin Network should make you love Jesus more. And if it doesn't, we got a problem. Logos Church should make you love Jesus more. And if it doesn't, then I'm not doing something right. I'm not ever going to be perfect. But coming and being around the body of believers, the church should make you love Jesus more. We should celebrate Him. We should glorify Him. We should make Him known because remember, you were a lost person. And now you're found. Verses 8 and 9, God reigns over the nations. God sits on His holy throne. The princes of the peoples gather as the people of the God of Abraham. For the shields of the earth belong to God. He is highly exalted. This psalm ends with this hopeful expectation. This is it. This moment is not only a fulfillment of the Lord's promise to Abraham in Genesis 17, but is also a prophetic picture of how all the nations will submit to King Jesus. Read the end of Matthew chapter 25. One day, all nations, all kings, all peoples will see the rule of King Jesus. We must read verse 8. God reigns over the nations. God sits on His holy throne. We must read that verse and picture Jesus on His ruling seat, sitting in His throne. Hebrews 1:3 reminds us, after Jesus completed His saving work, He ascended and sat down. Right now, He is seated at the right hand of the Father. Even though nations are raging and people are plotting, Psalm 2 says, and at times it feels like mountains are roaring and beginning to crumble, and the seas going crazy, Psalm 46 says, Jesus' position is unmoved. He's not worried. He's not up in heaven wringing His hands asking, what is going to happen? What is going to happen? It says He is seated because He is in charge. He is ruling, and everything, Ephesians 1:11 says, is working according to His counsel. So everything that's currently happening is all according to Jesus' counsel. Here's my conclusion for you. We must read Psalm 47 and see Jesus as our great Savior and King. I want the praise team to come forward. He has the whole world in His hands. This is where the truth gets in. He has the whole world in His hands. He has you. He has your family. He has your future. He has the moments that you're in right now. They're in His hands. And so you think that maybe things are out of control in your life, and you think that perhaps you need to take control somehow and do something that you need to let God do. I'm here to assure you with complete confidence, just like we have this testimony from this real king who really lived, who really got this letter, who really said we're going to annihilate you, who really came to the altar and sat it down and said, God, show up to be glorified. And then the next morning, 185,000 troops were found to be dead. And then the king was later killed himself. God's got you. I know it may not look like that right now. In the midst of your storm, in the midst of, I think, the taunting from the enemy, right? As it looks like the government's out of control, as it looks like war is imminent, as it looks like famine is in the land, as it appears that inflation is high and gas is high and problems are big and they're getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Do you feel the same thing that I feel? But what God is calling you to do is trust Him. He is calling you to take your problems, like I just gave you an example of David, 2 examples from God himself in the New Testament, Jesus, and this example from King Hezekiah, and they all did the same thing. They took their problem. Maybe it was you don't know how to control yourself. Maybe you name your problem. You know who you are, right? And I know who I am. But you got to take that and you got to give it to God, and you have to trust and wait on the Lord. You have to go forward and live this Christ-like life. And in that, I think God does answer prayers. I think God does do miraculous things. My salvation is miraculous. That I'm standing in this church preaching today is a miracle. My marriage, I've never met anybody who had a worse marriage than I have. And I'm not exaggerating. I'm not going into details. My family, it was bad. I've not met a person who has had as many challenges as Lisa and I had. And we said, we don't know how. We know He does. And so I'm a one day at a time submit myself to Him. Step by step, decision by decision, thought by thought. And I'm going to trust that God is going to hear my prayers. God is going to establish my steps. God is going to give me this new song to sing. And I'm up here today giving you this new song that I've been singing since 2007. My family can tell you how I went from like this liar, cheater, crook to this Jesus freak guy that everybody didn't know what to do with.
Praise God.
Right? And they were taken aback by it. And then I was told that won't last. I've seen people like you. It'll last for a couple months. Not ashamed, brother. So just as King Hezekiah and Isaiah the prophet prayed and cried to heaven over the Assyrian taunts and threats, God hears your cry. David told us He hears your cry. He hears this patient cry from His people. God saved the people of Judah. It says in 2 Chronicles 32:22 that He provided for them, not just a little bit, that He provided for them all the way around. He took care of every side of them, it says. Fully, in full, engulfed, enwrapped care. It wasn't like they needed $1,000 and God laid down the first 100. God gave them all 1,000 and said, I got you covered all the way around. He will save you. He will direct your steps. He will most certainly give you a new and joyful song to sing as a witness. Because remember, your saving faith, this new song that you're singing, isn't about yourself. This isn't about you coming to church, warming a pew, coming back, warming a pew, putting a little money in the bucket, feeling better about yourself. God saved you so you can go out and be a witness and testimony to a lost world of how good and great He actually is.